The North Pole was quieter than usual, as if the biting winds themselves had grown hesitant to howl. Beneath the perpetual twilight of the winter solstice, the elves worked in near silence, their tools moving rhythmically, their breath visible in the frosty air. Yet something in the stillness felt wrong. High above the workshop, the aurora borealis shimmered, its colours more vivid, more erratic than ever before. The oldest elf, who had seen centuries pass under these lights, paused from his whittling to glance up at the sky. His bushy white brows furrowed. "Something stirs tonight," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the faint crackle of enchanted wood in the hearth. Far away, hidden among the candy cane forests that stretched toward the horizon, a different kind of energy crackled. The Christmas Pixies had arrived. They were tiny creatures, no taller than a snow hare, with wings as translucent as frost on a window pane. Their laughter was sharp, their voices high-pitched and tinkling like broken bells. Each carried a faint, otherworldly glow, their magic humming with mischief and chaos. The leader of the troop, Thistle, perched on a crystalline branch, her violet eyes gleaming with delight. "We've waited long enough," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken secrets. "Every year the elves toil and humans rejoice. And us? Forgotten." Her wings flitted angrily, scattering a fine dusting of silver snowflakes. "Not this time. This time we'll remind them what happens when the pixies are ignored." A murmur of agreement rippled through her kin, their tiny forms glowing brighter with each whisper. They spoke in riddles, in fragments of words that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Thistle raised her delicate hands, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. "Let us claim what they hold most dear. The golden lantern," she declared, her grin sharp and wicked. "Without it, their precious Christmas will crumble." Back at the workshop, the elves continued their work, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Only Ember noticed the faint unease that seemed to hang over the night. He was unlike the others, a thinker rather than a craftsman. While the others built toys with the precision of clockwork, Ember preferred the quieter corners of the workshop, where he could study ancient scrolls and decipher the secrets of the North Pole's magic. That night, as the aurora danced erratically above, Ember's sharp eyes caught movement outside the frosted window. A shadow flitted past, too quick and too small to be a bird. Then another, and another. A faint, chime-like laughter followed, fading almost as soon as it began. Frowning, Ember set down the parchment he'd been studying and moved toward the window. Peering into the endless expanse of snow, he saw nothing but darkness and the faint glimmer of the lights above. Yet the feeling lingered, that peculiar weight in the air, as if the very magic that sustained the workshop had faltered for the briefest of moments. Suddenly, A sound shattered the stillness. A loud crash from the main hall. Ember spun on his heel and ran toward the noise, his boots crunching on the icy floor. As he approached, he heard gasps of dismay and the frantic clamor of voices. The hall was in chaos. Workbenches were overturned, spools of shimmering thread unraveled into tangled heaps, and a cascade of glitter poured endlessly from an upturned jar, covering everything in its path. The elves rushed to contain the mess, their usual precision faltering in the face of such unexpected disorder. "What happened?" Ember asked, his voice steady, despite the growing unease in his chest. "No one knows," an elder elf cried, throwing his hands into the air. "Everything was fine one moment, and then this mayhem. It's as if the tools themselves turned against us." Ember's gaze swept the room, taking in every overturned stool, every misplaced piece of machinery. And then he saw it. A faint shimmer in the air, barely noticeable, like the trail left by a firefly. His heart sank. The Christmas Pixies. He'd read about them before, in the oldest of texts. Their penchant for chaos, their bitterness towards the elves and their role in the holiday season. But they were supposed to be legends, nothing more than a cautionary tale. Yet here was proof, glimmering faintly in the aftermath of their mischief. Ember's thoughts were interrupted by another shout. "The golden lantern! It's gone!" The room fell silent. Every elf turned to the empty pedestal in the center of the hall, where the lantern had always rested, its golden light a symbol of the season's magic. Now, there was nothing but an empty stand, its ornate carvings casting long shadows in the dim light. The whispers began, low and fearful. Without the lantern, the magic of Christmas would fade. The toys wouldn't be delivered. The sleigh wouldn't fly, and the world would awaken to a joyless dawn. But Ember stood tall, his mind racing. He had studied the Pixies' ways. He understood their riddles, their games. And he knew one thing for certain. If the lantern had been taken, it could be retrieved. "I'll find it," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'll bring it back, and I'll outsmart them." The elves stared, some with doubt, others with hope. Ember didn't wait for their approval. He turned toward the door, the faint trail of the Pixies' magic glinting faintly in the snow outside. The hunt had begun. The trail of pixie magic shimmered faintly under the cold glow of the aurora, like the ghost of a star's reflection on frozen water. Ember moved through the snow, his boots crunching in the stillness, the air biting at his cheeks. The warmth of the workshop was far behind him now, but his resolve burned brighter than the northern lights. Back inside, the chaos continued to spread like wildfire. Without the guiding presence of the golden lantern, the delicate balance of the workshop had begun to unravel. The conveyor belts that once hummed in harmony now sputtered and lurched unpredictably, flinging unassembled toys into piles that grew like mountains. Glitter exploded from unseen seams, covering the elves in a fine, dazzling frost. Even the reindeer in their stables snorted and stomped, unnerved by the strange energy coursing through the air. The elder elves scrambled to restore order, their seasoned hands trembling as they worked. But no matter how they tried to set things right, the tools refused to obey, their enchanted mechanisms stuttering like a clock running backward. It was as though the workshop itself were resisting them, its heart thrown into disarray by the lantern's absence. At the heart of the chaos, Juniper, the foreman of the toy department, paced furiously, her face lined with frustration. "This is impossible," she muttered, yanking at her apron strings. "We've faced storms, sleigh mishaps, even that dreadful year with the gremlins. But this feels like something's been broken." From a high balcony overlooking the scene, Aurora, the eldest elf of all, watched with a grim expression. Her silver hair glimmered like frost in the dim light as she turned to the gathered apprentices behind her. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice low and reverent. "The emptiness?" The young elves nodded, their eyes wide with unease. They felt it in their bones, a hollowness where the lantern's light had always been. Without its glow, the magic that fueled the workshop was unraveling, and with it, the very essence of Christmas itself. But as the others panicked, Aurora's gaze shifted toward the distant horizon where Ember's solitary figure had vanished into the night. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "The Pixies have underestimated him," she murmured. "They think they've won, but they've never faced a mind like Ember's." Outside, Ember followed the trail leaper into the candy cane forest. The trees loomed tall and twisted, their red and white trunks spiraling upward like frozen whirlwinds. Every so often, he would catch a glimpse of movement, tiny darting shadows at the edge of his vision. The pixies were toying with him, leading him onward like a fish caught on a glimmering hook. He was not afraid. The air here felt alive, crackling with the remnants of their mischief. He recognized their game, the lure of confusion, the seed of doubt. They wanted him to question his path, to falter. But Ember's mind was sharper than that. He had studied their tricks in the ancient tomes, the fragments of lore tucked away in the library of eternal snow. He knew their ways, their love of riddles and puzzles, their penchant for making the simple seem impossible. Suddenly, the trail disappeared. Ember stopped, his breath fogging in the cold air. Before him stretched a wide frozen expanse, the snow so smooth it gleamed like glass. The shimmering trail of magic that had guided him vanished at the edge of the clearing, leaving him standing at the threshold of uncertainty. Then came the sound, a faint melodic hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the pixie's laughter, light and lilting, like bells played by an unseen hand. The air shimmered, and from the center of the clearing, a figure emerged. Thistle. She was as small as a snowflake, yet her presence filled the clearing with an otherworldly energy. Her violet eyes sparkled with mischief, and her translucent wings flickered like candlelight in the wind. In her tiny hands, she held the golden lantern, its glow dimmed to a faint pulse. "You've come far, little elf," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "But do you truly believe you can outsmart us?" Ember stepped forward, his expression calm but unyielding. "I don't believe," he said simply. "I know." The pixie troop appeared then, emerging from the shadows like spectres. Their glowing forms flitted around the clearing, their laughter rising like a haunting chorus. They circled Ember, their movements hypnotic, their magic weaving patterns in the air that seemed to bend reality itself. Thistle tilted her head, her smile both playful and dangerous. "Then prove it," she said, holding the lantern aloft. "If you wish to reclaim what is yours, you must solve our riddle. But beware, the price of failure is steep." The clearing fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the frozen air. Ember squared his shoulders, his sharp mind already racing. "Ask your riddle," he said, his voice steady. Thistle's smile widened, and the light of the golden lantern flickered like a dying star. "Very well," she said, her voice a whisper of wind. "What is it that glows brightest when shared, yet fades when hoarded?" The words hung in the air, echoing faintly as the pixie's laughter swirled around him. Ember closed his eyes, the answer forming like a spark in the depths of his mind. The stage was set. The duel of wits had begun. The clearing shimmered under the spectral light of the dimmed golden lantern, its glow casting strange, shifting shadows across the icy ground. Ember stood motionless, the riddle replaying in his mind like a melody he dared not forget. Around him, the pixies' laughter grew softer, their circling forms slower, their presence more oppressive. They were waiting, watching, savoring the tension like predators toying with their prey. "What glows brightest when shared?" Ember murmured under his breath misting in the cold air, yet fades when hoarded. He had read of riddles like this, their answers rooted not in logic, but in the heart. The pixies thrived on cleverness, on twisting truths into conundrums, yet their magic had its limits. Ember knew that every riddle they posed held a solution, for to offer one without an answer would break the ancient laws that bound them. Thistle hovered closer, her violet eyes gleaming with wicked delight. "Have you no answer, little elf?" she asked, her voice a silken thread weaving through the silence. "The lantern's light grows dimmer with every moment you hesitate." Her words were true. Ember could see it, the The faint, flickering glow of the lantern was fading. Its once steady pulse, now a faint tremor. He felt the weight of it, the urgency, the responsibility. Without the lantern, the magic of Christmas, the joy, the hope, the unity would wither like frost beneath the sun. But even in the face of such stakes, Ember's mind remained sharp. He allowed himself a single deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs and clearing his thoughts. "Hope," he said suddenly, his voice firm. He watched Thistle closely, searching for any flicker of reaction. Hope glows brightest when shared and fades when it is hoarded. The pixies froze mid-air, their glowing forms momentarily dimming as if struck by an unseen force. For a moment, Ember thought he had won. But then Thistle's laughter rang out, sharp and cutting, reverberating through the clearing like the chiming of broken glass. "A clever answer," she said, her smile curling at the edges like frostbite creeping across a leaf. "But wrong. The lantern does not burn for hope alone. You must think again." The pixies' laughter resumed, louder and more haunting, their circling forms growing faster, blurring into streaks of light. Ember clenched his fists, his confidence wavering for the first time. What had he missed? What truth had slipped past him, hiding in the shadows of his own thoughts? As the pixie's magic began to swirl more violently around him, Ember knelt to the ground, his hand brushing against the ice. It was cold to the touch, its surface smooth, yet alive with the faintest vibration, a rhythm, a heartbeat. The realization struck him like a lightning bolt. The answer wasn't something abstract like hope. It was something more alive. "Light," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's light itself. It grows brighter when shared, like the warmth of a flame, and fades when kept to oneself." Thistle's laughter faltered, her grin stiffening into something less confident, more cautious. The pixies around her paused mid-flight, their glowing forms dimming ever so slightly. Ember felt the shift, the faint tremor of doubt rippling through their ranks. He pressed on, his voice gaining strength. "The lantern's glow," he continued, rising to his feet, "is the light we give to others. Kindness, joy, love. These things cannot survive in isolation. They must be shared." Thistle's wings flickered, and for the briefest moment, Ember thought he saw something in her eyes. A flicker of emotion, a crack in her mischievous facade. Was it hesitation? Or something deeper, something buried beneath centuries of envy and bitterness? The pixie's laughter ceased entirely, the clearing plunging into a silence so profound that even the faint hum of the aurora above seemed muted. Thistle held the lantern before her, its light trembling as if caught between her grasp and Ember's words. "Perhaps you're wiser than you look, elf," she said, her tone laced with reluctant admiration. "But one answer is never enough. If you truly seek to reclaim this light, you must earn it, not with riddles, but with your heart. The ground beneath Ember's feet shifted, the ice cracking into a jagged maze of mirrors. Each shard reflected a version of himself, some tall, some small, some twisted and dark. The pixies' voices echoed now, not with laughter, but with riddles of their own, questions layered with meaning and deception. "Who are you without your tools?" one mirror whispered. "Would you give what you love to save another?" asked another. "What is Christmas to you, elf?" came the final voice, softer than the rest. Ember stared at his reflections, his pulse quickening. The maze had transformed into a test of his very essence. To retrieve the lantern, he would have to face not only the pixies, but himself. And so he stepped forward, the ice groaning beneath him, his own shadow stretching long and thin in the dim light. The golden lantern, faint but flickering, lay ahead, its glow a beacon in the encroaching dark. The jagged maze of mirrors stretched endlessly before Ember, each icy shard glinting like the edge of a blade. His breath came slow and steady, misting in the cold air. Around him, the pixies hovered like ghostly fireflies, their laughter now subdued, their glowing forms dim as though the maze itself had siphoned their energy. At the center of it all stood Thistle, her violet eyes fixed on Ember, the golden lantern pulsing faintly in her hands. "Step carefully, little elf," she called, her voice as smooth and sharp as ice. "This is no game of wood and tools. The maze reflects not what you are, but what you hide. And your heart, oh, how it loves to hide." The words echoed through the clearing, reverberating against the frozen walls. Ember's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He took a cautious step forward, the ice beneath him groaning like an old ship at sea. Each mirror seemed to ripple as he moved, the reflections within distorting, faces that were his, yet not his, expressions twisted by doubt, fear, and guilt. The first mirror loomed tall and wide, its surface shimmering as though alive. As Ember approached, the image solidified into a version of himself, one with slumped shoulders and weary eyes, his hands empty and trembling. "Who are you without your tools?" the reflection asked, its voice a hollow echo. Ember stared at the figure, his heart pounding. He had always been the thinker, the solver of puzzles, the one who thrived in the quiet corners of the workshop. His hands had shaped solutions when others faltered. His mind had pieced together what was broken. But what if those tools were taken from him? What if his cleverness failed? "I am more than the tools I use," he said at last, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "I am the heart that wields them, the mind that creates. I am their purpose, not their servant." The mirror shivered, its surface fracturing with a sound like cracking ice. Ember stepped forward, leaving the broken reflection behind. The second mirror rose from the ground, its frame wreathed in frost that shimmered like diamonds. Within it, Ember saw a familiar scene, his own hands holding a small wooden toy, a gift he had crafted for a young elf many seasons ago. But in the reflection, the toy was snatched away, and the child's tearful face stared back at him, pleading. "Would you give what you love to save another?" the reflection asked, the voice soft yet piercing. Ember's chest tightened. He remembered the moment well. The toy had been one of his finest works, a piece he had poured his heart into. But when the child's toy had broken, he had given it away without a second thought, knowing it would bring joy to another. And yet, the memory carried a pang of regret, a small selfish part of him that had mourned the loss of his creation. "I would," Ember said, his voice firm despite the ache in his heart. "Because what I love is not the thing itself, but the joy it brings to others." The mirror cracked, its shards falling away like snowflakes, and Ember moved forward once more. The final mirror was smaller, almost unassuming, but its surface was impossibly clear, reflecting a perfect image of the elf standing before it. This time there was no distortion, no trickery. It was Ember, just as he was. "What is Christmas to you, elf?" the reflection asked, its tone neither accusing nor kind, but simply curious. Ember stared at himself, the question reverberating in his mind. He thought of the workshop, the laughter of the elves as they worked, the reindeer pouring the snow in anticipation, the shimmering glow of the golden lantern. But Christmas was more than these things. It was the light that reached beyond the North Pole, beyond toys and traditions. A light that warmed hearts, brought strangers together and reminded the world to hope. "Christmas is the gift of giving," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "It's the light we share, the love we offer without expecting anything in return. It's what binds us even in the coldest of times." The mirror didn't shatter like the others. Instead, it dissolved into a swirl of light, the path before him clearing. Ember stepped through the final barrier, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of the golden lantern. At the maze's center, Thistle waited, her small frame silhouetted by the lantern's dim radiance. The other pixies had fallen silent, their glowing forms hovering like faint embers in the air. Thistle's expression was unreadable, her violet eyes studying Ember with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, perhaps respect. "You've answered well," she said, her voice softer now, the sharp edge of mockery gone. "But words alone do not reclaim what has been lost. If you truly wish to save this light, you must prove it." Ember stepped closer, his gaze steady. "How?" Thistle extended her tiny hands, the golden lantern trembling between her palms. "Take it," she said. "But beware, its light will judge your heart. If it finds you wanting, it will fade. And with it, so will Christmas." The weight of her words settled heavily in the icy air. Ember hesitated only for a moment before reaching out, his hand steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. The lantern was warm, impossibly so, its faint pulse quickening as his fingers closed around it. For a moment, nothing happened. The clearing was silent, the pixies motionless. And then slowly, the lantern's glow began to strengthen, its light spreading outward like the first rays of dawn. The pixies gasped, their glowing forms brightening as the warmth reached them. Thistle's violet eyes widened, and for the first time, a genuine smile graced her lips. "You are worthy," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. The golden lantern flared in Ember's hands, its light washing over the clearing in waves of warmth. The ice beneath his feet softened into a gleaming carpet of frost-kissed snow, and the jagged mirrors of the maze dissolved into crystalline mist. Around him, the pixies hovered in silence, their glowing forms flickering uncertainly, as though unsure of what they had just witnessed. Thistle stood at the center of it all, her tiny frame casting an elongated shadow against the radiant glow of the lantern. For the first time, her mischievous confidence seemed to falter. She regarded Ember with a strange mixture of wonder and envy, her violet eyes glistening as the lantern's light bathed her in its brilliance. "You've done what no elf before you has managed," she said at last, her voice barely a whisper. "You've earned its trust." Ember met her gaze, his expression steady but not unkind. "The lantern isn't something to be earned, Thistle," he said. "Its light isn't a reward. It's a gift, one that belongs to all of us." The pixies stirred at his words, their faint hum of magic growing stronger. One by one, they drifted closer to the lantern, their shimmering forms drawn to its warmth like moths to a flame. Yet their movements were tentative, as if they feared the light would reject them. Thistle's wings fluttered, her expression tightening. "You speak of sharing, but the elves have always kept the light to themselves," she said, bitterness seeping into her voice. "We've watched from the shadows, year after year, as you basked in its glow. Do you know what it feels like to be forgotten?" Her words cut through the clearing like a cold wind, and for a moment, Ember was silent. He thought of the ancient texts in the library of eternal snow, the warnings about the pixies' envy, their mischief born of neglect. But the books had failed to capture the truth, their pain, their longing to belong. "I don't know that feeling," Ember admitted, his voice low. "But I know what it means to feel small, to think your work is unseen. And I know that no one, not the elves, not the pixies, not anyone, should feel that way. That's not what Christmas is about." He stepped closer to Thistle, the lantern's glow spilling across her face. "You've always been part of this, Thistle. You and your kin. We've just been too blind to see it." the clearing fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Thistle's wings stilled, her violet eyes fixed on the lantern. Slowly she raised her tiny hands, her fingers brushing the edges of its golden frame. For a moment, her touch was hesitant, as if she feared the light would recoil. But the lantern's glow only grew stronger, its warmth enveloping her like a forgiving embrace. Around them, the pixies began to change. Their glowing forms brightened, their mischief dimming into something softer, gentler. The air shimmered with their magic, no longer sharp and chaotic but harmonious. A melody of bells and whispers that resonated with the lantern's light. The first to speak was a pixie with wings like frosted glass, her voice trembling with wonder. "It's warm," she murmured, her tiny face alight with joy. "I didn't know it could feel like this." Others joined her, their laughter no longer mocking but bright and free, like the sound of snowflakes falling on a still night. The clearing filled with their voices, a symphony of light and sound that melted the lingering shadows of bitterness. Thistle turned to Ember, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he thought she might protest, that her pride would keep her from accepting the gift he offered. But then she smiled. A small, tentative smile, fragile as a snowflake but no less beautiful. "You've given us something we never thought we could have," she said softly. "You've shared the light." Ember smiled back, his heart swelling with relief and something deeper, hope. "It's not mine to give," he said. "It's ours to share." By the time they returned to the workshop, the chaos had begun to subside. The elves paused their frantic efforts as the lantern's glow swept through the hall, its light restoring order to the machinery, calming the restless reindeer and mending the torn threads of magic that had frayed in its absence. Aurora, the eldest elf, stepped forward, her silver hair glinting in the lantern's glow. She looked first at Ember, her gaze filled with pride, and then at the pixies, her expression softening into something akin to understanding. "You've done well," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Both of you." Thistle dipped her head, her wings fluttering nervously. "We only wanted to be part of it," she admitted, her voice small but sincere. "We didn't know how." Aurora nodded, her gaze sweeping over the gathered elves and pixies. "Then let this be the beginning," she said. "No more shadows, no more division. From this day forward, we build Christmas together." The workshop erupted into cheers, the elves and pixies celebrating as one. The golden lantern burned brighter than ever, its light spilling out into the endless night, a beacon of unity and hope. And as the sleigh took flight that Christmas Eve, its bells ringing out across the world, the pixies worked side by side with the elves, their mischief transformed into merriment, their laughter a part of the season's magic at last. For the first time in centuries, The Christmas Pixies were home.